Welcome to Itasca Water's Practical Water Wisdom series. I'm John Downing, your host for today. Itasca Waters is a nonprofit whose goal is to educate residents of Itasca County and our region about how to keep our water clean for both the environment and the economy. We've been teaming up with like-minded people and organizations for 14 years now, and you can read about those projects on our website at itascawaters.org. If you're interested in the waters of our region, please consider becoming a member or a volunteer to help support programs like this. And we thank our partners shown here on your screen for their support in producing this program. A little bit of housekeeping. Here on this next screen is your guide for today's program. Trisha Robinson will speak for 30 minutes or so, then we'll answer questions from you. To submit a question, you only need to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in a brief question. You can do this at any time, and we will read the questions on your behalf. We will not be using the chat function today. This program is being recorded and will be available for viewing online through our website, itascawaters.org. Finally, we value your opinion, so please click on the survey link that will be shown on your screen at the end of today's program, or complete the survey that will be sent to you by email. We thank you for doing that. Today's special guest is Trisha Robinson, Epidemiologist Supervisor of the Water-borne Diseases Unit at the Minnesota Department of Health. She oversees the routine surveillance activities, outbreak investigations, and health promotion activities for all waterborne pathogens, including things like Cryptosporidium, Giardia, Legionella, E. coli, and free-living amebas. Trisha's topic for today is waterborne disease and symptoms. Can swimming make us sick? In the land of 10,000 lakes, we are lucky to be surrounded by so many great places to swim and recreate. Unfortunately, the risk of waterborne diseases is also a reality. Trisha will talk about what you can do to help minimize your risk of getting one of those diseases this summer. So here's Trisha Robinson.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. I am excited to be here and to talk to you about waterborne illnesses and hopefully have a little bit of some tips to help you walk away with to try and stay healthy this summer while you are out enjoying all of the great waters that we have here in this state. So as you can see here on this slide, I have share the fun, not the germs. Hopefully what all of us can kind of strive for as we're out recreating. Perfect. So recreational water illness outbreaks in Minnesota. On this slide here, it tells us about all of the outbreaks that we have had over the last 10 years, and it is really up to date, showing us through June even of 2023. And you can see that it shows us all of the waterborne outbreaks that we have had in any type of venue that are due to recreational water. So that includes pools and hot tubs, so any kind. But, today we are just going to be talking about our untreated venues like our lakes and rivers. And so I'm going to give you that more on our next slide here. So draw your attention to our green. And you can see that while we have a lot of waterborne outbreaks in Minnesota, fortunately, only a small portion of them come from our lakes and rivers. So I think people often think that, untreated water means that it is riskier and that that's where a lot of people are going to get sick from. But actually, we see more of our outbreaks in Minnesota come from our pools and spas, where, unfortunately, chlorine does not kill everything. So we have other precautions, but that's not what we're going to talk about today, but it's kind of another little tidbit for people to keep in mind as you're out enjoying things. But you can see that we do have outbreaks in lakes and rivers, and people can get sick there too. Oh gosh, touchy here. So all of these different recreational water illnesses from lakes, where are they? So this little guy, as we call him, Clean Gene, he is kind of the poster child for our waterborne illness group here at the Minnesota Department of Health. We have the whole Clean family, and you might see some of the other little people across this talk today. But he represents, or the different places on his body, represents all the different kinds of infections that you can get. So ear infections, like swimmer's ear, It is actually the most common waterborne illness. Kind of not what you want to get, but certainly something that people can get when they get contaminated water in their ear. Acute gastroenteritis. And so things like Cryptosporidium, Giardia, E. coli 0157, Shigella, norovirus. These are what we most commonly see outbreaks of in Minnesota in waterborne illness, are these things that cause things like vomiting, diarrhea. Then multiple manifestations. These are due to cyanobacteria or harmful algal blooms, and they cause just a lot of different symptoms. And we'll go into this a little bit more, so I won't spend a lot of time on that right now. But skin infections, swimmer's itch. Unfortunately, a lot of people have probably experienced this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. And then neurologic infections like Naegleria fowleri, or what some people may have heard of as the brain-eating amoeba. We'll talk about that too. So how are diarrheal illnesses spread? I said that is our most common cause of outbreaks here in Minnesota. And it's really kind of gross to think about, but we all have to think about it because it's true. So on average, people have 0.14 grams of feces on their bottoms at any given time. And if you're going in the water, it can rinse off into the water with you. And so thinking about 0.14 grams, it's really kind of hard to think about what that is. And so if you see this picture on the slide, they are Nerds candies. And if you are familiar with Nerds candies, I love Nerds candies actually. They are kind of all different shapes and sizes, but on average, that's about like the size of a Nerds candy. And that is about the amount of poop that somebody has on their bottom at any given time. And so think about if somebody is sick with diarrhea, their stool contains millions of germs. And so when they go in the water, if they are sick, then that is all washing off into the water with them. And so if other people are swimming and they swallow even just a little bit of that contaminated water, then that can make a person sick. And so the idea of telling people that they need to go, that they need to take a shower before they go swimming, that's not just a recommendation that somebody dreamt up because it sounded good. There actually is a reason behind it. It is because we want all of these nerds washed off of a person before they get into the water. We don't want you bringing it into the water with you. We want you leaving that out of the water and showering off before you get in the water. So just kind of a little quiz to think about for yourself. You can't interactively do this on the screen, but how much water do you think that the average child swallows during 45 minutes of swimming? So half a tablespoon, 1 tablespoon, 2.5 tablespoons, or 4 tablespoons? Well, the answer is 2.5 tablespoons. So you can think about, how many nerds could actually be in 2.5 tablespoons. That's a lot of potentially contaminated water if that's washing in there. And, we don't think anybody is intentionally swallowing water when they're going swimming, but we want to try to do things that keep water out of our mouth and not, actively trying to put water in our mouth, since we know that we are accidentally ingesting water and it can be contaminated. So we're going to talk about one particular pathogen in general that is a common cause of waterborne outbreaks in Minnesota, and the most common cause, and that is Cryptosporidium. And it is a diarrheal illness caused by the parasite Cryptosporidium, and it's transmitted via the fecal to oral route. And what that basically means is that somehow somebody else's feces or an animal's feces that has it has to get into the mouth, has to get into your mouth. And water is a really great way for that to happen. And, because you're swallowing it right up. But it's protected by an outer shell that allows it to survive outside the body for long periods of time. And I know we're talking about lakes here, but to give you an idea, it is even a chlorine tolerant pathogen, and which means that it can persist for days even in properly maintained pools. So you can think about how well it can survive even in our lakes, for people to swim in and for it to be out there. So moving on off of the diarrhea part of things, if hopefully nobody is eating lunch right now, but on to harmful algal blooms. So harmful algal blooms are blue-green algal blooms that contain toxins that can cause illness in humans and animals. HABs can occur everywhere in Minnesota, but they thrive in really warm, shallow, nutrient-rich lakes. And HAB-related illness, when we're talking about that, the exposure occurs by swallowing, having skin contact with, or breathing in droplets of air. And the symptoms and the severity of illness depend on the amount and the type of toxin an individual or an animal was exposed to. And in people, symptoms may include vomiting, diarrhea, skin and eye irritation, cough, sore throat, headache. And in animals, similar, but it's like vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, and death. And animals we see a little bit more of here in Minnesota reported to us. And I'll talk about that a little bit. We have a formal surveillance system with a One Health focus that was initiated almost 10 years ago now. And we started this to review illness and environmental data to determine how likely the illness was related to a HAB exposure. So over between 2014 and 2022, we have had 11 human illnesses reported to us. And then among animals, we've had 11 dog deaths, unfortunately, and then 4 additional dog illnesses. This is very likely an underestimate of the real number of illnesses out there. Like I said, when I went over those symptoms, you can tell that that is really kind of a really nondescript way of illnesses. You know, they can cover kind of cover the gamut. You know, it might look like you have a diarrheal illness, or you could have a respiratory illness, and it might not be something that people think about. You know, that a harmful algal bloom caused those symptoms. And so it is likely that these are really underreported and that there are more out there than these numbers show. And when I show you this picture on this next slide, as to which of these are blue-green algae, do you think? Again, kind of a self-quiz, showing Lake A, Lake B, Lake C, or an option of Lake D of all of the above. And the answer was all of the above. So we'll go back to that. Looking at kind of all of these are, again, blue-green algae. And this shows you that it comes in many different forms and colors. And so that's why we say, when in doubt, best to keep out. And when we talked about how there were all these dogs, you can think about that a dog is less discriminatory often in terms of what kind of water they might go in than a person might. And so keep in mind, not just for you, but for your pets, that it's really important that you keep them out if you're ever doubting the water where you are. And so if you see that sort of spilled green paint or pea soup kind of looking water, especially, to make sure that you're keeping out of it and keeping your animals out of it and not going in there. And we are really lucky here in Minnesota that we have all kinds of really great water to choose from. And so making sure that, you know, if it doesn't look like the best place to be swimming, it probably isn't, and to take a, you know, to find a different spot to swim. So on to Naegleria fowleri. So this is an amoeba commonly found in warm, fresh water. Unfortunately, there is no quick, reliable test to tell us whether or not it is present. And so how people get exposed to this is by having the water, or by having the amoeba introduced into the nose during activities in water. And then it migrates to the brain and destroys brain tissue. It causes an infection called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. And you can see here on right, the Star Tribune article saying that there are 2 deaths from infection via one lake, incredibly rare. Unfortunately, we have had 2 confirmed cases of PAM in Minnesota that were from the same lake in the Twin Cities Metro back in 2010 and 2012. And so a little bit about PAM. The symptoms start about 5 days after exposure. These initial symptoms include headache, fever, nausea, vomiting, and then it quickly progresses into additional symptoms like stiff neck, confusion, seizures, hallucinations. And these are, symptoms which people might think of more like a meningitis that you might be more familiar with. And like I said, this disease progresses very rapidly, and unfortunately, it is almost always fatal. Individuals who have symptoms like this, it's really important that they seek medical care immediately. If they have these symptoms, really somebody should always seek medical care immediately if they develop symptoms like this. But particularly if they have a symptom of swimming in fresh water. This infection disproportionately affects males and children. And the why behind that is really kind of unknown, but it could be more because of the activities that are taking place that make them more prone to water going up the nose. You can often think that children are a little bit more daring and are more likely to do activities that water might be more prone to going up the nose with. And so this just kind of gives you an idea of the number of case reports of PAM caused by Naegleria fowleri by state of exposure since 1962. And you can see that Minnesota is the most northern state. And when Minnesota had its first case back in 2010, we were the most northern case by over 500 miles. There have been additional cases you can see on the map since that time that have been a little bit closer to us. But there has certainly been a shift in the changing climate of this pathogen, and kind of a real change in thought as to kind of temperatures and survival of it. Our case really kind of put it on the map as to where it could be and where you could find it. Unfortunately, this is not the kind of thing that you want to be known for or not want to ever have. Unfortunately, we changed that understanding of where it could be found and what is known about it then. Before that, it was always thought to only be something that could be found in the southern tier states where the water is really warm. And this, again, is to give you an idea of the number of case reports by year, because again, like I said, that it is very rare. I think it's important for people to understand that, that while that doesn't take anything away from these families that have been devastated by this infection, it is incredibly devastating, but it is important to remember that it is something that fortunately is a rare infection. And so think about all the people that are swimming all of the time, that fortunately it is very uncommon for people to get infected with it. And again, like I had alluded to, that it is much more common in males and in children. This just really illustrates that, that the males are in blue and the females are in orange, and that we really see a lot more cases in these younger, in the children and teens, and then it quickly tapers off in the older ages. So preventing PAM. What can we do? I can give you this doom and gloom about what it is, but people are going to swim. So what can we do? And so really, the only sure way is to avoid participation in freshwater related activities. And that's not really a very practical recommendation, especially when I'm talking to a group of people that probably really love recreating in water and getting out and enjoying that. And so really what we need to talk about are reducing the risk by limiting the amount of water that goes up the nose. And so that's what is most important. And so when you're out taking part in water related activities, it's important to avoid warm, fresh water when water temperatures are high and water levels are low. Putting your head under, you could avoid putting your head under the water. Again, that might not be so practical. Holding your nose shut or using nose clips. And then avoid digging or stirring up the sediment. And so that's because it can kind of insist down in the sediment. And so we want to avoid stirring that up. And that can be, especially for young kids, again, it can be really fun to kind of like play down in the sand and play down in that sediment area. And so it's important, not to encourage those sort of behaviors where that would be more likely for somebody to be doing that there. And while we are not talking about this, we're talking about freshwater stuff. I just always like to put a plug when we are talking about PAM, because people might not always be familiar with it. We also talk about, there have been cases associated with people that use neti pots. So people, when they're using neti pots, it's just, and also a way that water goes up your nose. So if you do use neti pots, just make sure that you are using distilled water, or that you are using water that has been boiled and cooled. Just a little plug for that out there too. So kind of switching gears again, let's talk about swimmer's itch. So swimmer's itch, people are probably familiar with because they have had it before. I think most people have kind of had swimmer's itch in Minnesota, unfortunately, but it is a skin rash caused by an allergic reaction to parasites that infect some birds and mammals. And that is because it is an allergic reaction to an infection. The more you are exposed, the more likely you are to develop intense and immediate symptoms. And kind of like more often you have it, then the worse it's going to get. And these larvae from it are likely to be present in shallow water by the shoreline. And so with that, we often see kids get it because they're kind of playing again in that shallow water right by the shore. So what can we do to prevent swimmer's itch, which we really kind of think of as a nuisance here? Do not swim in areas with a known swimmer's itch problem or where signs have been posted. It seems like common sense, but if you see a sign that says known swimmer's itch, know that there is known swimmer's itch problem. So stay out of that area or proceed with caution and know there's a high likelihood you could get swimmer's itch. Do not swim near or wade in marshy areas where snails are commonly found. Towel dry or shower immediately after leaving the water. We've talked about showering before getting in the water, but also showering off after can really help with this. And do not attract birds to areas where people are swimming. People like to feed the birds or that stuff. We don't want that. We don't want to be attracting them to the area. We get a lot of calls here about swimmer's itch and about people, having gotten swimmer's itch and complaints about it. We do not investigate outbreaks of swimmer's itch, but we do know that there are a lot of swimmer's itch problems all over the place. And so, it is a problem all of the time. But fortunately, it is a nuisance problem more than, like an infectious disease type problem. So kind of, after all of this sort of doom and gloom of like the disease and the, problems with it, what can we do to stay healthy at the beach and the lake and minimize our risk of illness so that we can feel good about being out there and enjoying the water? So like we talked about, don't swallow the water. Keep that water out of your mouth so that you can minimize the risk of swallowing the water in general. That means don't play like a human fountain. If you're not familiar with playing human fountain, that's probably a good thing, but it means like putting the water in your mouth and spraying it out. Try not to do that and minimizing that risk to swallowing the water. Showering after swimming, like we talked about, that will help you with reducing your risk of swimmer's itch. Avoid swimming after a rain event. Heavy rains can wash the contaminants into the water. And so avoid swimming immediately after heavy rain events can help reduce your risk of getting sick. Avoid swimming at beaches where you can see discharge pipes. You don't want to be, again, we have lots of options of where to swim. And so not swimming where you may see that there could be potential contaminants going right into the water. And avoid swimming if you see a blue-green algal bloom, like we said. If in doubt, best to keep out of that area. And then kind of personal responsibility. What can you do to help keep the water healthy for everyone around you? Stay out of the water if you have diarrhea. Again, that seems like a no-brainer, but we ask people as kind of our routine surveillance system. We have a number of diseases that are reportable here to us at the Department of Health, and we follow up with them. And if they are commonly transmitted through water, we ask people about where they've been swimming before they got sick and where they've been swimming since they got sick, in case there are interventions that we need to take. And many times people report a number of places that they've been swimming while they've been very actively ill with diarrhea. And so it is really important that if you are sick with diarrhea, do not go swimming. There will be plenty of time for people to be swimming once they are healthy again. But if you have diarrhea, please stay out of the water and wait until you are healthy again. Showering before you go swimming, again, like we talked about, all of those little germs that can be on our bottom, unfortunately, we need to shower off to get them off of us before we go swimming. Taking frequent bathroom breaks. This is really important, especially with children. Waiting for them to say that they have to go to the bathroom can often be too late. And so making sure that we proactively take bathroom breaks is really important. And also kind of going along with this is making sure that when we're changing diapers, that we're changing diapers in proper changing areas or away from the water if there is not a designated area, so that that is not going into the water. Disposing of trash properly and taking care of our waters, maintaining septic systems, and not encouraging waterfowl by feeding ducks, geese, or other birds. So I wanted to also talk about E. coli in water. This is a really common topic that people often hear, and they hear about it when if you are familiar with any sort of beach monitoring program, or you hear about it on the news a lot. On the right-hand side, you will see a couple of news articles that say like Twin Cities beach closed down after E. coli found in water, or beach closed, blame it on the rain, about the beach closures. But I think there is often a public misconception about what this is. And so it's important to remember that there are hundreds of kinds of E. coli, and most do not make you sick. And that E. coli is a sign that there could be fecal contamination in the water, either from humans or animals. And high levels of E. coli indicate the germs that make people sick might also be in the water. It is not, when there is beach monitoring that is testing for E. coli, it is not the same as when we have an outbreak at a beach that is an outbreak of E. coli 0157, or we sometimes have non-0157s, but those are Shiga toxin producing E. coli's. It does not mean the same thing. Again, there are hundreds of kinds of E. coli's, and only a handful of them are these Shiga toxin producing E. coli's that are going to make people sick. And so these, the E. coli that we're testing for in water is just an indicator organism that it could be. And so they're not the same thing. It could be one of them, but it is, just an indicator of contamination. And so if you see something in the news saying that there is a beach closure for illness outbreak, that is a very different thing than a proactive beach monitoring closure just due to routine beach monitoring. That is, again, a proactive step so that we can, take steps to make sure that somebody, might not get sick. But it does not mean that people are going to get sick or that it is the same E. coli. And talking about beach monitoring in Minnesota, beach monitoring is at the discretion of the entity that is responsible for the beach. And so in many cases, this is the city, the county, or the park district. And the frequency of monitoring and the criteria used for an advisory, that is up to them as well. There are standards, and many of them follow kind of the federal EPA standards, but that might vary as well. The only beach monitoring that is conducted by MDH is along Lake Superior. Whether or not a beach is monitored, though, the same recommendations apply. So, kind of the recommendations that I already talked about with, things that you can do to stay healthy at the beach, those are the same whether or not you see that your beach is monitored. We have many beaches in this state that are monitored, but many, many more that are not monitored. And so whether or not a beach is monitored, all of those recommendations for keeping yourself healthy and keeping the beach healthy, those are the same regardless of whether a beach is monitored or not. And just to talk about beach monitoring a little bit more, coming soon, thanks to the Clean Water Fund, we will be having a statewide beach portal. And this will provide one location where Minnesotans and tourists can find all beach alerts that are in place in Minnesota. And so this will include things like routine monitoring closures, harmful algal blooms, major pollution events, and outbreaks. This will not impact whatsoever about whether a beach is monitored. That will remain a local decision. But we are excited. We often get asked about like where people can go and look to see if their beach is monitored. And it is at this point in time, it's all over the place as to whether a particular beach is monitored, or, if there's a closure there that is on a particular city's website, or it might not, they might be monitoring, but they might not have that publicly available. It really is kind of a all over the place, but hopefully in 2024, 2025, it will be launching in this statewide beach portal that we will be putting out, which we are excited about. And then your complaints. If you ever think that you have gotten sick from water, please let us know. So we maintain a statewide Minnesota foodborne and waterborne illness hotline where you can send your complaints to us. And so this is available via phone, it's available email, and then we also have an online complaint system. So it is staffed Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. But our online complaint system is, of course, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we take complaints from, water, any route of water. So drinking water, recreational water, however you think you got sick, and from food too. So if you think that you got sick from one of those routes, please let us know. It's the only way, oftentimes that we would hear about things and be able to take interventions to help prevent additional people from getting sick is if people reach out to us and let us know. And then just a couple of resources for you. We do have the MDH Waterborne Illness website where we have a lot more material on some of the topics that I have covered today, including print materials that might be of use to you. And then also, like I had mentioned, the only beach monitoring that the state runs is our Lake Superior Beach Monitoring Program. And we do have a separate website for that, which is mnbeaches.org. So if you are going to be along Lake Superior at all, check out that website too. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Wow, thank you, Trisha. That was interesting, so interesting and very, very helpful. I really appreciate it. Now let's go to the question and answer portion of today's program. It'll be hosted by Bill Granches, the director of the Itasca County Aquatic Invasive Species Program and a longtime board member with Itasca Waters. Bill?
Thank you, John. Hello and welcome everybody to today's question and answer section of today's program. Submit your questions in writing by using the question and answer icon. Do not use the chat functions. Now I'm going to read aloud the questions that we've been taking and writing down here. Some of them are similar, so we might combine them together. Now, if we don't get to your question, if there's not enough time today, please feel free to email us and then we'll try to follow through with that and get your question in writing. Okay, Trisha, our first question today is, are municipal water treatment plants available to completely decontaminate water before discharging in another body?
Sorry, Bill, could you repeat that?
Sure. Are municipal water treatment plants able to completely decontaminate water before discharging in a body of water?
I am probably not the most qualified person to answer that, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. Next question. Are there viruses one can catch from water?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually just had a pretty large norovirus outbreak at a beach in the Twin Cities metro. And so norovirus, people unfortunately kind of think of as the stomach flu, which we kind of cringe about as an epidemiologist. We try to dispel that and say that there's no such thing as the stomach flu. That is norovirus. But yes, that is very commonly spread through water. And I think that outbreak was a great example that people were really surprised. They think, like, oh, that spreads through food. But if somebody is infected with it, again, as gross as it is to think about, and if they are infected with it and they go swimming, that small amount of fecal material on them can wash off into the water and contaminate that water and get a lot of people sick. And in that outbreak, we saw just that, a lot of people sick at that beach, unfortunately.
Wow. Okay. Oh, now here's a good one. Sorry. My 18-month-old grandson, my wife and I were just talking about this next question. Are swimmer covers for toddlers still wearing diapers useful?
So it's kind of a complex answer in that they're not leak proof in that. And they can give you kind of a false sense of security. And so they can certainly help. But when I talked about how it's important that you take bathroom breaks, it's also important, that you, be changing diapers frequently. And, that you be changing diapers frequently. The swim diapers, they catch solid material. And so that is all that they will do. And so if somebody is at all sick or anything, say they had diarrhea, it will not catch that. And so they, if somebody is ill, they're not going to catch that material. And so they're going to stop like a formed stool from entering the water if they're functioning correctly. But it is really important that, again, people are taking frequent bathroom breaks and changing the diapers frequently. But don't let them give sort of this false sense of security that they are perfect.
Got it. Thank you. Next question, is water purification in the boundary waters necessary if you're traveling there?
Oh, yeah, great. I can talk about backcountry water all the time. Yes, it is really important that people take steps to appropriately treat their water in the backcountry, including in the boundary waters. We do routine surveillance for all of the intestinal parasites here at the Department of Health. And unfortunately, we see a number of Giardia cases in particular of people who have been in the backcountry and have inappropriately treated their water while there, or chosen to take no treatment. And so it is important that if people are in the backcountry, that they are treating their water appropriately.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, last time I was there, that's exactly what we did. Okay, next question. How big an impact to bacteria load in a lake is caused by malfunctioning septic systems?
So I can say that, I wouldn't be able to tell you, kind of on a, for routine impaired waters. I think that would probably be more handled by a pollution control agency. But I can tell you from an outbreak standpoint, how we see like the contamination occur, that it in pretty much all of our outbreaks, it appears that the source is almost always humans and swimming while ill, unfortunately. And so we looked for all of these other sources. Is it, septic, or is it, something else that is improperly disposing of the water? And unfortunately, or fortunately, for however you want to look at it, it often is, or almost always is, that the ill people going in the water and swimming while sick, and not another, human problem taking place and loading the water. Not to say that those other things are not occurring too, but that in the case of making all the people sick is often the swimmers making each other sick and not staying out of the water while sick.
I see. Okay. Next question. How much fecal bacteria should be considered normal or healthy for lakes in the northern half of the state?
Yes, so there are, there can be, bacteria in water. So we have each, or, levels that we have established. And so, I'd say like we have criteria that we use for our beach monitoring program. And so for that, we use E. coli as our standard. And so we say that if a single water sample exceeds E. coli count of 235 organisms per 100 milliliters, then that's when we post a health advisory. And so that's the criteria that we have. We also have a geometric mean standard. And so that's if E. coli counts from 5 water samples collected during a 30-day period exceeds 126 organisms. And so I guess I would say that is, like what we rely on as our standard to say, we expect some, it's not drinking water. It's not, what we would expect to be clean from any sort of bacteria, that there can be some in there, but we use that as kind of our standard for if it is above that, then that is, kind of the acceptable risk that can be there.
Got it. All right, next question. How do viruses like cholera spread in water bodies?
Yeah, so luckily that is not here. So that would be of like brackish water, salt water or brackish water. And so that is not, Minnesota, we luckily, or maybe people do want us to have an ocean here. Maybe especially if it meant that we would have nice, sunny, warm weather here in the winter. But we are not of a place that we would be having that here. But that is, of a saltwater, brackish water.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Do land use practices, for example, mowed lawns versus buffer zones with plants, make a difference for bacteria entering the water?
So again, if you have like runoff, and you could have things going in. That's why, following heavy rains,
Sure.
then you can have more runoff going into it. It depends on what, if there are contaminants that in there, then we want to try to reduce that. And there are certain practices that can help reduce the contaminants from getting in the water. If there are contaminants there, then there are certain things that you want to do to help keep that runoff from going into the water, and steps that can be taken to do so. But again, we want to try to, things that you can do to try to keep contaminants out is always a great practice.
Agreed. Yeah, it's super, super important. Okay. Do doctors in Minnesota receive training to screen for waterborne pathogens? Do they know what to look for?
Our hope is that they all, our hope is yes. I will say that we do our best effort to try to continually educate them too. And so I can't speak to, what sort of, they all receive different training through their medical training. But we do a lot of outreach here at the Department of Health to continually educate them and have them here through a number of different rotations and things of that nature to always make sure that we are doing our best to make them aware of all of the different waterborne pathogens and testing and all of there's a changing climate all of the time for different testing availability. There are different platforms that come out and rapid tests and different tests and ones that are good and ones that are better and all of the things. So always trying to make sure that we are keeping people apprised of all of those changes too.
Good, good. Now we're going to combine two questions here. They're really quite similar. What is the effect of warming climates on our chances of getting sick from water exposure? And are pathogens and illnesses on the rise?
Yeah, so especially when you think about, the changing climate and, it can impact different waterborne pathogens. So like I talked about with Naegleria fowleri, how we, we're the northernmost case by over 500 miles and probably actually more, closer to 600 miles, actually. That is probably more influenced by a changing climate and how we have seen, other more northern tier states having cases now too. Same thing, harmful algal blooms influenced by the changing climate. And so certainly waterborne disease lends itself well to impacts from changing climate. But kind of those numbers are small. Our disease numbers are small for those pathogens, fortunately. And so, I think it's important that we remember that, we are watching these things carefully and, doing outreach and interventions where possible and other things to be apprised of anything that we need to do as we watch changing climate conditions.
Very good. I always get so many questions about swimmer's itch every year, but here's one for you. Does Fels naphtha soap help with swimmer's itch?
I don't know that I could answer that one specifically.
Me neither. Okay, fair enough. Is there a relationship between eutrophication and waterborne illnesses other than HABS?
Yeah, so aside from HABs, with Naegleria, there is some thought that, there could be a correlation too, depending on the lake. Again, numbers are very small, so making correlations and things are challenging. But other than that, again, most of the time, when we talk about diarrheal illnesses, it's people being sick, so it doesn't apply there. And so beyond that, where we really see that correlation would be associated with harmful algal blooms.
Got it. Okay. Next question. What are the big three waterborne diseases in our northern Minnesota lakes, most frequent and most severe?
Yes. So, again, we don't see a lot, most illnesses are sporadic. And so saying, that something definitely came from swimming, unless somebody is part of a known outbreak, we can't say that with 100% certainty. But most commonly, we'll say, which would, be the same for, northern lakes versus, southern. What I would say that people should be, concerned about or think about, right, would be harmful algal bloom. And then really diarrheal illnesses. And so, that kind of runs the gamut. And so, Cryptosporidium, norovirus, or, E. coli, Giardia, kind of any of them, because they cause similar symptoms. And so people keeping those in mind, especially while swimming.
Gotcha. Okay. Somewhat related. What are the main sources of diseases in our lakes, and can these sources be regulated?
Yes. So main sources of diseases, like I talked about, are people. And we wouldn't say we can really regulate people. So we try to do is we try to educate people. And so what, again, as our hope is that people will learn about waterborne diseases, and that they will, know the importance of staying out of the water if you are sick, and showering before swimming, and all of the things, or, not feeding waterfowl, and keeping them away from, keeping them away from the water, beach area, things like that. And those sort of things that we can do to help keep the water healthy for everyone. I think it is a gross analogy, but often kind of settles or, helps put things in perspective for people, especially if you're swimming at a beach area. Kind of think of that as a communal bathtub. And we are sharing the water and the germs in it with everyone. And so we all have a responsibility to do our part to keep that bathtub area healthy for everyone.
Very good. Just like an aquatic invasive species, education is always so important, and oftentimes, if not always, the most efficient way to stem these issues. Okay. If a lake association wants to get their water tested for pathogens, how can we get that done?
Yeah, so if people were to, there are a number of different contract laboratories around the state. So I would encourage people, if they're interested in getting water tested, that they would contact they could reach out to a local contract laboratory that would be near them to be able to do that testing. I think that, if people are interested in doing water testing, they probably want to think through what that water testing might look like, the frequency of it, where they're going to test. And, sometimes doing kind of like a one-off testing is not particularly useful for them, but they may need to do more frequent testing and do it in places where most heavily used places, or places where they think there is contamination, and have, the parameters they're going to do, and also think through what are you going to do with these results. They often get contacted after somebody has done something and they haven't thought through what they're going to do with the information. And so I think just really keeping in mind what your plan is for what you're going to do with the results ahead of time Say you get really high results, what are you going to do? Are you going to inform people of these results? There can be ramifications from that. So just having a plan in place beforehand is important.
Sure. We here at Itasca Soil and Water Conservation District, we have a lot of, we don't actually do the testing here, but we act as kind of a conduit for that. So if anybody wants information on that water testing, please do reach out to Itasca Soil and Water Conservation District. We're on the internet, it's very simple. I think that's all we have time for questions right now, Trisha. So I'm going to turn this back over to John. John, back to you.
Well, thanks, Bill, and really a big thank you to Trisha Robinson for that great information. I'm hoping as we enjoy the wonderful waters of the state of Minnesota that what you've told people will keep some people from getting sick. It's really so helpful. If you'd like to watch the program again or recommend it to your friends and neighbors, a recording of today's talk will soon be on our website, itascawaters.org. We would love to get your feedback, so click on the survey link, which will be on the screen at the end of today's program, or you'll be getting an email evaluation form from Itasca Waters, so you can choose how you'd like to respond. We would really appreciate hearing from you. Our next program will be on August 3rd, and our speaker will be Dr. Cody Sheik, Associate Professor in the Department of Biology and the Large Lakes Observatory at University of Minnesota Duluth. He'll be speaking about impending aquatic invasive species threats and can they kill our pets or hurt our kids? I'm John Downing, and thanks for being with us today.